She was thrown off a train into the frozen wilderness with no money, no food, and no hope of survival. As the cold closed in and death seemed certain, a lonely cowboy appeared with an offer that would change her life forever. What began as a desperate rescue soon became a story of survival, trust, and an unexpected bond forged in the heart of the frontier. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable frontier stories. Cold autumn winds swept through the Montana mountains, while gray clouds gathered above endless forests of pine, and the last light of day faded behind snow-capped peaks. Emma Carter stumbled as the freight train disappeared around a distant bend, leaving her alone beside the tracks. At 23, Emma was slender and graceful, with long chestnut-brown hair that had fallen loose from its pins, soft hazel eyes, and fair skin now streaked with dirt and tears. She had grown up in a respectable middle-class family in Chicago, where comfort and routine once seemed permanent. But everything changed after her father's sudden death. Debt collectors had stripped away nearly everything her family owned, leaving Emma with no savings, no protection, and no clear future. Though naturally kind and intelligent, months of hardship had replaced much of her confidence with quiet anxiety and constant fear about what tomorrow might bring. Her left knee throbbed from the fall. The conductor who had discovered her hiding aboard the train had shown no mercy. Emma hugged her thin coat tighter and stared at the wilderness around her. There were no houses, no roads, no signs of life. Only mountains, forests, and the bitter cold creeping deeper into her bones. She forced herself to walk along the tracks. Each step hurt. As darkness settled across the valley, fear slowly replaced exhaustion. Strange noises echoed through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an animal cried out. Snowflakes began drifting from the sky. Hours later, Emma could barely feel her feet. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed onto the frozen ground. For a moment, she considered staying there. The cold felt strangely comforting now. Maybe this was how people simply disappeared. Then she heard something, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. A horse emerged from the darkness, followed by a tall rider. The man sat confidently in the saddle, as though he belonged to the mountains themselves. Jake Turner appeared to be around 38 years old, broad-shouldered, and powerfully built from years of ranch work. A thick dark beard covered his jaw, while weathered features and sharp gray eyes revealed a life shaped by hardship. Quiet and reserved, Jake rarely trusted its strangers. Years of loneliness on an isolated mountain ranch had taught him to rely only on himself. His gaze moved over Emma's torn clothing and trembling body. "If you stay here," he said calmly, "you'll be dead before sunrise." Emma looked up at the stranger, unsure whether to fear him or trust him. Jake extended a gloved hand toward her. "Come with me if you want to live." With no strength left to argue and nowhere else to go, Emma reached for his hand and followed the cowboy into the snowy mountains. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky as frost coated the valley and thin trails of smoke drifted from the chimney of Jake Turner's cabin. Emma woke sore from the previous day's ordeal. Every muscle in her body protested as she stepped from the narrow cot Jake had offered her. The cabin itself was simple and practical, built for survival rather than comfort. A small stove warmed the single room while hunting gear, saddles, and tools filled nearly every corner. Jake was already awake. He sat at the wooden table drinking black coffee. In daylight, Emma could see him more clearly. The deep lines around his eyes and the weathered skin of his face spoke of years spent battling harsh winters and endless labor. He was not unfriendly, but he carried himself like a man who had learned long ago not to depend on anyone. Loss and isolation had hardened him into someone who trusted actions far more than words. "Breakfast first, then work," Jake said simply. Emma expected sympathy. Instead, she found herself carrying water from a frozen creek less than an hour later. The first week tested her in ways she had never imagined. Every task seemed impossible. Splitting firewood left her arms trembling. Carrying feed buckets strained muscles she never knew she had. Even lighting the stove became a daily battle. Several times she nearly broke down in frustration. Yet each evening, after completing another difficult day, she felt a small sense of accomplishment she had never experienced during her old life in Chicago. One afternoon, Jake introduced her to his horse, Ranger. The gelding was a 12-year-old dark bay horse, with intelligent brown eyes and a long scar across his shoulder from an encounter with a mountain lion years earlier. Calm and dependable, Ranger had carried Jake through countless storms and cattle drives. The horse seemed suspicious of Emma at first, often turning his head away whenever she approached. "You earn trust the same way with horses as people," Jake told her. Slowly, the words stayed with Emma. As the days passed, she noticed details about ranch life that outsiders rarely understood. Winter preparations consumed nearly every waking hour. Hay needed stacking, fences needed repairs. Water troughs had to be protected from freezing. Each unfinished task could become dangerous once heavy snow arrived. One evening, while helping Jake move supplies into the barn, Emma accidentally dropped a crate of lantern oil. The glass shattered across the floor. She froze. Back in Chicago, mistakes often brought criticism and disappointment. She braced herself for anger. Jake simply looked at the mess. "Next time carry one box instead of two," he said before handing her a broom. The reaction surprised her more than shouting would have. For the first time, Emma began to understand the man behind the rough exterior. Jake demanded hard work, but he never mocked failure. If someone was willing to learn, he respected the effort. 2 weeks after arriving, the first major snowfall blanketed the valley. Emma stood outside the cabin, watching white flakes drift across the mountains. The landscape looked beautiful, but intimidating. The world beyond the ranch had nearly vanished beneath layers of snow. A familiar feeling of fear crept into her chest. She could still leave. She could try to reach a town. She could search for another life. Yet, as she looked toward the cabin, where warm light glowed through the frost-covered window, she realized she no longer felt like a helpless stranger hiding from the cold. For the first time since her father's death, she had a purpose waiting for her each morning. Jake stepped onto the porch beside her. "Storm's coming," he said while studying the darkening clouds gathering over the western ridge. Emma followed his gaze. The snow falling now was only the beginning, and neither of them knew that the coming winter would soon test them far beyond anything they had faced so far. The storm arrived during the night. By dawn, snow was falling so heavily that the distant ridges had disappeared behind a wall of white. Wind slammed against the cabin and rattled every loose board on the ranch. Emma stood at the window, watching the storm build, while Jake studied the pasture through narrowed eyes. Something was wrong. Several sections of the eastern fence had collapsed beneath drifting snow. Worse, part of the cattle herd had pushed through the damaged barrier and disappeared toward the forested hills beyond the valley. Jake reacted immediately. Within minutes, he was saddling Ranger, despite the worsening conditions. Emma watched him pull on a heavy wool coat and thick leather gloves. "You can't go out in that," she protested. "I can't leave 30 head of cattle out there either," Jake replied. Then he mounted Ranger and vanished into the storm. The hours that followed were the longest Emma had experienced since arriving at the ranch. The wind howled without pause. Snow buried the porch steps. Several times she stepped outside, searching for any sign of Jake, but the blizzard swallowed everything beyond a few yards. By late afternoon, fear began to settle heavily in her chest. Not long ago, Jake had been nothing more than a stranger. Now she found herself unable to stop worrying. Darkness had already fallen when she finally heard hoofbeats. Emma rushed outside. Ranger emerged from the storm first, exhausted and covered in ice. Jake remained in the saddle, but something was wrong. His body leaned awkwardly to one side. The moment he tried to dismount, his legs collapsed beneath him. Emma barely managed to catch him before he hit the frozen ground. Together they struggled inside the cabin. Jake's shoulder was badly injured. A fall on an icy hillside had thrown him from the saddle while chasing the cattle. His left leg had also been twisted during the accident. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Emma became responsible for someone else's survival. The following days were difficult. Jake hated being confined indoors. The injury left him frustrated and restless. Emma quickly learned that beneath his calm exterior lived a stubborn streak stronger than any storm. Twice she caught him attempting to carry firewood despite barely being able to stand. Twice she ordered him back to bed. To her surprise, he listened. As the storm continued outside, an unfamiliar routine formed inside the cabin. Emma cooked meals, changed bandages, and managed the daily chores. Jake spent long hours sitting near the stove, sharpening tools or repairing tack while his injuries slowly healed. One evening, Emma discovered an old wooden box stored beneath Jake's bed. She had only been cleaning when a faded photograph slipped free. The picture showed a smiling woman and a small girl standing beside a younger version of Jake. Emma immediately understood. The woman was Sarah Turner. Sarah had been Jake's wife. She possessed gentle blue eyes, long blonde hair, and a warm smile that seemed capable of brightening any room. According to Jake, she had been known throughout the valley for her kindness and ability to make strangers feel welcome. The little girl beside her was Lily Turner. She had inherited her mother's blonde hair and Jake's gray eyes. Lily had been energetic, fearless, and endlessly curious about the world. For a long moment, Jake stared at the photograph. Then, for the first time, he told Emma the truth. Years earlier, a severe fever had swept through a nearby settlement. Sarah became sick first. Lily followed days later. Neither survived. Jake had buried them himself on a hillside overlooking the valley. After that, he stopped visiting neighbors. He stopped attending church. He stopped allowing people close enough to hurt him again. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything the storm could create. Emma looked at the man sitting beside the stove. For weeks she had seen only a hard rancher. Now she saw someone carrying years of grief alone. Outside, the blizzard slowly began to weaken. Inside the cabin, the distance between them had quietly begun to disappear. The deepest part of winter settled over the valley like a frozen blanket. Snow covered the fences, the barn roof, and every trail leading beyond the ranch. Days became shorter, colder, and quieter, yet life on the ranch never slowed. By January, Emma barely recognized herself. The soft-handed city girl who had fallen beside the railroad tracks seemed like someone she had once read about in a book. Her hands now carried calluses from work. Her cheeks had become lightly weathered by wind and cold. She could saddle Ranger without assistance, repair broken fence rails, and help move cattle through snowdrifts. Each challenge she overcame strengthened something inside her that had nearly disappeared after her father's death. Jake noticed the changes even when he rarely spoke about them. One morning, while repairing a gate together, Emma lifted a heavy timber beam that would have been impossible for her only months earlier. Jake watched silently before shaking his head with a faint smile. "You've become tougher than half the ranch hands I've known." The compliment lingered in Emma's thoughts for the rest of the day. As Jake's injuries healed, their daily routine settled into an easy rhythm. They woke before sunrise, worked side by side throughout the day, and shared simple meals beside the stove each evening. Neither talked much, yet the silence no longer felt uncomfortable. For Jake, the change was far more unsettling. For years he had lived without expecting anyone to be waiting when he returned home. Now he found himself glancing toward the cabin windows whenever he rode back from checking cattle. The sight of warm lantern light and Emma moving inside brought a feeling he had almost forgotten. It felt like belonging. One afternoon, a stray dog wandered onto the ranch. The animal was a large shepherd mix, roughly 4 years old, with thick brown and black fur and a torn right ear from old fights. He was thin, cautious, and clearly accustomed to surviving alone. Jake found him near the barn searching through feed sacks. The dog growled at first. Emma knelt down and offered a piece of dried beef. Within minutes, the animal was following her everywhere. They named him Scout. Jake pretended not to care. Yet Emma often caught him secretly tossing scraps to the dog whenever he thought nobody was watching. As the weeks passed, Scout became another quiet presence around the ranch. He followed Jake during chores and slept near the cabin door at night. Then came the storm. The weather changed suddenly one evening. Heavy clouds rolled over the mountains while powerful winds swept through the valley. By midnight, the storm had become one of the worst either of them had seen all winter. The cabin groaned under the force of the wind. Around 2 a.m, a deafening crash shook the building. Emma woke instantly. The front door had partially broken loose from its hinges. Freezing air rushed inside. Without hesitation, Jake grabbed one side of the door while Emma pulled on her coat and rushed to help. Together they fought against the wind as snow blasted into the cabin. Every gust felt powerful enough to tear the entire structure apart. For nearly an hour they worked side by side, using ropes, boards, and spare lumber to reinforce the entrance. At one point, a violent gust nearly knocked Emma backward. Jake caught her arm before she fell. For several seconds, neither moved. The storm howled around them, yet neither seemed aware of anything except the other. Eventually, the repairs held. Exhausted, they collapsed beside the stove, while Scout curled at their feet. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. Something important had changed. Jake no longer saw Emma as a helpless stranger he had rescued from the wilderness. She had become his partner, and sitting beside the fire while the storm raged outside, Emma realized she could no longer imagine this ranch without Jake in it. Beyond the walls, winter still ruled the mountains. Inside the cabin, however, something warmer had quietly begun to grow. Spring arrived slowly in the Montana mountains. Snow retreated from the valley floor, revealing patches of green grass and muddy trails that had been hidden for months. Meltwater flowed down the hillsides, and for the first time since Emma had arrived, the ranch no longer felt isolated from the rest of the world. One bright afternoon, Scout barked from the edge of the property. Emma looked up from repairing a saddle strap and spotted a wagon approaching along the mountain trail. The driver was Thomas Reed. Thomas was a merchant in his early 50s, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin, a neatly trimmed gray beard, and calm brown eyes. Unlike many traders who passed through frontier settlements, Thomas had earned a reputation for honesty. Years earlier, he had lost his own ranch during a drought, an experience that left him practical and surprisingly compassionate toward people facing hardship. Jake greeted him with a firm handshake. The merchant unloaded sacks of flour, coffee, tools, and supplies that Jake had ordered months before winter arrived. While the men worked, Thomas struck up a conversation with Emma. At first, he assumed she was a relative visiting the ranch. Then he heard her story: the train, the debt, the winter, the months spent surviving in the mountains. By evening, Thomas sat quietly beside the stove, studying her with thoughtful eyes. "You know," he finally said, "when I head back to town in 2 days, there's room in my wagon." Emma looked up. Thomas continued carefully. "You could come with me. From there you could find work, rent a room, maybe even return to Chicago if that's what you want." The words landed harder than she expected. For months she had focused only on surviving. She had stopped thinking about choices. Now one stood directly in front of her. That night Emma barely slept. She lay awake listening to the wind move through the trees while questions filled her mind. The town meant opportunity. It meant safety. It meant returning to a world she once understood. Yet whenever she imagined leaving, something felt wrong. The next day she watched Jake repairing a section of fence near the pasture. He worked steadily beneath the spring sunlight, completely unaware that she was observing him. Or perhaps he was aware and simply chose not to look. Jake never once asked her to stay. That hurt more than she expected. Part of her wanted him to say something, anything. Instead, he treated the decision as hers alone. Late that afternoon, Emma finally confronted him. "If I leave with Thomas," she said quietly, "what happens?" Jake hammered another nail into the fence before answering. "You start a new life." "And you?" he shrugged. "I keep running the ranch." The answer was simple, too simple. For the first time, Emma realized what separated Jake from many men she had known before. He cared enough to let her choose freely, even if the choice might leave him alone again. The following morning, Thomas finished loading his wagon. The horses were ready. The road back to civilization stood open. Emma carried her small travel bag outside and stopped beside the wagon. Thomas smiled kindly. Jake remained near the barn. His expression revealed nothing. For several long moments nobody spoke. Then Emma slowly set the bag back down on the ground. Thomas blinked. "You sure?" he asked. Emma nodded. More certain than she had been about anything in years. The frightened young woman who had been thrown from a train no longer existed. The mountains had changed her. The ranch had changed her. Most importantly, the people she had become while living there was someone she respected. She turned toward Jake. "I think I'm already where I belong." For the first time, genuine surprise crossed his face. Then slowly, a smile appeared, not the guarded half-smile Emma occasionally caught during winter. A real one. Thomas laughed softly and shook his head. "Well," he said, climbing into the wagon, "that's about the easiest delivery I've ever made." After the merchant disappeared down the trail, silence settled over the valley. Emma stood beside Jake on the porch overlooking the green hills below. Without saying a word, Jake reached for her hand. Emma squeezed it gently. The long winter was finally over, and together they stepped forward into a future neither of them had expected to find. Sometimes life changes not when we find the place we were searching for, but when we discover the people who help us become stronger than we ever thought possible. Emma's journey reminds us that hardship can reveal strengths we never knew we had, and that home is not always where we started. It can be the place where we are accepted, valued, and free to grow. Perhaps many of us have faced moments when a door closed unexpectedly, only to find that another path was waiting ahead. Whatever season of life you're walking through today, may you never lose hope in the possibility of new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed this journey, consider sharing it with someone who may need a little encouragement today. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of hope, resilience, kindness, and second chances. May God bless you, your family, and your home with peace, strength, good health, and many reasons to smile in the days ahead.